Today we have with us Johansson Quijano, who will be running an interactive fiction session. So we'll be making a text-based video game for ourselves today. He's a professor at Tarrant County College, an English professor, and I've been on a couple of committees or in situations where I've gotten to hear him speak, and I really actually always look forward to when he opens his mouth to say something, because it's always interesting. So we'll have a great program today. Tomorrow we have our final session in the morning at 11 a.m. Central. That will be on IP, intellectual property, and how you as a maker can protect your projects. And then we'll have our closing networking activity tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central, and we will announce the winners of the Apathon for the week. So without further ado, Johansson Quijano.
All right, well, hello everyone, and thank you for that amazing introduction. I want to make sure that all of you can see my screen right now, the MakerCon PowerPoint. All right, perfect. So today we're going to be talking about interactive fiction. I'll start with a brief primer on what it is, how it works, and how we need to take on a kind of designer mindset, to borrow that term from this morning's talk. Before we start creating, and then we'll have mostly a kind of hands-on workshop where I will teach you how to create interactive fiction, and you kind of make along. All right, so that's pretty much the scope of today. Why interactive fiction, how to create interactive fiction, and then towards the end, we'll talk about where to publish, which interestingly, there used to be a lot of places where you could publish interactive fiction, but slowly they have been closing down. The last one that focused only on interactive fiction closed down on September last year. So moving as a community, interactive fiction writers, more towards platforms where games are also published. So I'm going to share with you Itch.io. That's a platform that I used to publish my own work. So why interactive fiction? Essentially, it encourages a kind of engaging form of writing. Now, we all know that writing can be engaging to us as writers, as creators, when we create. And if we just so happen to create something that's really good, then that can also be engaging to the reader. But the kind of engagement that we're talking about, it's more what we call ergodic engagement or ludic engagement, right? Kind of play-based engagement in which the story isn't really complete until the reader has his or her say on the outcome of the story, right? So the reader is not so much just flipping onto the next page or clicking next on a screen, but rather actively making choices. And depending on what the writing structures, both at the sentence level as well as a broader narrative structure. Traditionally, we have the narrative structure where you have, of course, a beginning, middle, and end, rising action, climax, ascending action, and so on. But when we start thinking about interactive fiction, we need to consider multiple possibilities. We need to consider how the reader will try to essentially break what we have created. We need to put ourselves in the mind of the reader and think ahead what they might have chosen to do. And we're actually going to read through or play through a couple of these works of interactive fiction so that you can see what I mean by that. And then, of course, it promotes technological literacy, both as a creator and as a reader, because they are distributed in these kind of digital platforms. Plus, they encourage participation, not just outside in a community about the text, right? If any of you are familiar with, for example, the Doctor Who community and so on, all these fandoms, there's a lot of interaction within the community, but not with the text itself, other than it being consumed. Well, with interactive fiction, we have that active participation that allows us to, let me just go ahead and approve this person, have an active voice in how the story manifests. So what is interactive fiction anyway? It is a subset of interactive narrative. And I do want to differentiate between these two things. Interactive narrative is any story, whether it's visual or text-based, that allows the reader to interact with it, which is why we have here screenshots of what we call a visual novel on the left and then a role-playing video game on the right. Both of these are from the perspective of the creator. So here on the one on the left, you see the commands with the jump choice 1. And then over here on the right, you see all the technical windows for you to create. But the one that we're going to focus on is interactive fiction, which is specifically language-based and text-based. And when we are creating interactive fiction, it actually looks like the screen here in the center. This is a screenshot from Twine. And what we see here, right, to give you a bit of a peek into the next couple of slides, is that we have the start of the story, and then suddenly when we get to a certain point, chunk by chunk, the reader is given a choice, and depending on what the reader clicks on, well, there can be from this module 3 different outcomes, 1, 2, and 3. So it is, like we mentioned, a language-based text game that allows for player choice, and they do have varying levels of narrative complexity. So you can have interactive fiction, as we'll see in a little bit with the yellow spectrum. You can have interactive fiction that just gives you 2 choices, and then each of those gives you 2 more choices and so on. Or you can have interactive fiction that's more play-based, where it's like, for example, you would type in grab the key, walk downstream, and so on, right? So it's more play and less story, but still just as language heavy and still requires just as much thinking about structures. And like we mentioned, there are varying levels of ludic complexity, which takes us to the LL spectrum, or the literary ludic spectrum. This was a concept coined by Astrid Ensling in her book Literary Gaming, where she places on either side of the spectrum interactive fiction that's purely literary, where you only have language and the choice between 1, 2, 3 options and so on. And then on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you have more play-based interactive fiction. And what I would like to do to kind of demonstrate these 2 ends of the spectrum is to we're going to skip that one here, to show you how each of them work. So this one is called Depression Quest. It's an award-winning work of interactive fiction designed by Zoe Quinn. And it takes you through the experience of someone suffering through severe depression. This is more on the literary side. And so, as you can see, if we click on next, it gives us a bit of a description of what we, the readers, would be hypothetically going through. So here we have, you spent several hours at work the past week or so, you found your job motivation flagging, and so on and so forth. And then towards the end, you are given 3 choices. Notice how one of the choices is blanked out. So do you want to reluctantly sit down at your desk? Do you want to turn on the TV, or do you want to just go into bed? So you would choose one of these, and it'll take you to the next passage, right? And then you would go over the passage, you would read what's happening to you as a reader / participant, and move on, right? So this is a work of interactive fiction. We can see the choices here towards the bottom. That would be the interactive aspect, which, because we are in the literary spectrum, is very slight, right? But then you have works like Adventure, also known as Colossal Cave Adventure, which is more ludic, still language-based. So this one, I'm going to click no for instructions, gives you a description of where you are. You are standing at the end of the road before a small brick building. Around is a forest. A small stream flows out of the building and down the gully, right? You are not given any kind of narrative. You're just plopped into the setting. And then you have to figure out, well, what do I do? And the system is designed in such a way where you have to be mindful and specific with your inputs. So for example, if I click enter building, right, rather than type in enter building, you are inside the building, a well house for a large spring, there are keys on the ground, there's a lamp, and so on. And so as a player, I would think, well, you know, if there's some keys there, there's a bottle of water, maybe I can drink water. You drink the water, the water bottle is now empty. And then maybe pick up keys, or maybe get keys. That's what's tricky about these systems. Now you've gotten the keys, and so on, right? So these 2 texts are on the different ends of the L spectrum. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on, where's my presentation? It's not that one there. No, it's not this. Okay, what happened to my presentation then? Sorry, give me a second so I can project it again. There, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the literary end of the spectrum, which is a little bit easier to manage as a designer. But before that, though, you need to, again, get into that kind of design thinking perspective. What do I mean by that? Let's think about interactive fiction for a second. We have a passage. Let's say that we're going to make up a story about a librarian. She's sitting at her desk, and then she sees a student walking through the door. And you want to give that librarian two choices. That librarian can either remain sitting and not acknowledge the student, which would not be a good choice, right? And that would be option 2 over here. Or you can have the librarian welcome the student. That would be option 3 over here. So we have from one passage 2 choices. But the thing is that if we continue just giving the reader 2 choices in each passage, things can get out of hand pretty quickly, to the point where if we just do that repeatedly here in this model, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 passages that the reader would engage with, but you've actually written 31 passages. So how do you do that? How do you put in just enough effort so that your work feels interactive, but that you don't burn yourself out creating all of these different tree branch options? The answer is using a more of a spider web approach, where you have a certain number of choices, but ultimately all those choices converge back into a single passage. And I'm going to be showing you how to do this kind of thinking starting now when we get into Twinery, which is here. I'm going to go ahead and post this link into the chat so that if you want to make along, that's perfect. You can do that. And what you want to do, once you're here, you can either use it online or you can download the program onto your computer. I'm going to use it online. I'm going to skip the quick tutorial. And as you see, here it says that there are 0 stories right now. So I want to make my own story. I'm going to click that plus. And what should we call that story? Does anyone want to volunteer a name for the story? Let's go ahead and do something a little bit interactive here. You can type it in the chat if you're uncomfortable chatting on the mic.
Are we sticking with the librarian character, or are we going with a whole new story?
If you want to, we can stick with the librarian, or if you want to do something else, we can do something else.
Well, as a librarian, I'm okay with being, a character in your story. So let's go with the librarian.
All right, perfect. And so let's call this one then. Let's go with the librarian and add.
Oh, well, you better spell it right, but I can live with that.
Yeah, that's sorry. I'm just.
I know you're typing.
So some rude. All right. So the first, pardon?
Use your imagination on the spelling.
Yeah.
It's creative fiction. It can be whatever you.
I'm focusing right now on the structure of the story rather than on the spelling or whatever. But so we're gonna start with an intro, and in this intro, well, let's go ahead and start with that same setting. So it's cloudy. Today is Thursday afternoon. All right. And let's see, the librarian sits at her desk when a student walks in. Now, here we need to consider what are the choices that we are going to give. If we were to leave the text as is, and hopefully all of you can see the text in your screens, if we were to leave the text as is, then we would not have any kind of level of interaction. So for us to give the reader interaction, we need to use the square brackets. We would use 2 of them and give the reader some kind of choice. So stand up and greet the student, or just sit there. And once we close this, we'll see that the system has given us our 2 options. We have stand up and greet the student and sit there. So I'm going to move these a little bit to the left and to the right. And once we double click, we will be able to further edit. Now, you will notice that from a management point of view, from the perspective of someone who actually has to work with the system as we move forward, having the modules be named stand up and greet the student might not necessarily be the most effective thing. So in order to create modules with names that are more manageable, once we create the options, let's go ahead and sit there. So the librarian stays there and ignores the student. And then let's go ahead and add an option that's kind of, introspection and regret, maybe. So she knows she shouldn't do this. And if we were to leave it there, the new option that shows up in our system would have that title. But if we want to name it something more manageable, we use the fully horizontal slash that's above the enter key, and we give it a name. So we can call this one regret, and then we close the bracket. And that new bracket there has that new moniker. All right. Now, this is going to make it easier if eventually we want to link back to that text. For example, stand up and greet the student. Let's say that she stood up and thought, OMG, I'm tired. Let's use a little bit of lead speak there. And immediately regrets it. That label there should link us to, I'm not sure why it's linking it there. Oh, I know why. Give me a sec.
Is it because you didn't put that hash mark?
Because I didn't put, yep, that should be it. There, /regret. Oh no. And that should, okay, so that's weird. They must have updated the system or something. But I can figure out what it is and then just upload it in a document. I have got a kind of working document with all the updates that they do. So let's go ahead and discard that bit then for now. If you have a module that you don't like, you can just hover over it and click the delete key. Right now, going back to our system here, let's say that we want to use text that's a little bit stylistic. We want to add maybe italics, bold, underline, that kind of stuff. It gets a little bit tricky, but it's definitely manageable. So if we want to highlight something in italics, we would use the asterisk mark. If we want to highlight something in bold, we would use 2 asterisks on either end of the text. And if you want to use underline, this is where it starts getting a little bit into kind of computer science and coding. You would use the HTML coding format where you have the greater than and smaller than symbols with the letter U for underline. And so what I want to do now is go ahead and do a test run of this so that you see kind of what you get. It's a cloudy Thursday afternoon, the librarian, blah, blah, blah. And if we sit there, no, what's the other one? The one that didn't have the style, this one that had the style. So you will see that she stood up and thought, oh my God, I'm tired. Stood, has an italic slant and has the bold, and oh my God, I'm tired is underlined. So you do have the flexibility to kind of add some stylistic marks. Now, these are just the basic stylistic components, and they do get a little bit more complex, but we'll talk about those when we move forward. Let's go over here to the regret model for a second so that I can actually show you something really interesting. You can add images to your interactive fiction story, but they have to be images that exist online. Why? Because the system does not let you upload directly into the server. So you have to have the document that you've created, your work of interactive fiction here. And when you have the image, you're essentially calling that picture from wherever it's residing, from some server somewhere. So what I want to do is maybe let's look up a picture of Danelle. Do you have a favorite character in fiction?
I created my own avatar for my information goddess alter ego.
Okay, so let's see what's the name of it. I'm just trying to
It's,
think,
it's
like,
I don't know. It's on my library website. But you said I can't upload it. Can it take a picture off of my website?
no, you can't you can't upload it directly into Twinery, but you can upload it to your website. So
But it's
what's your
already on
website?
my website. Do you want me to put you the link?
Yeah, link me your website, and then we'll go from there.
I will put it in the chat.
Yeah, we should be able to get the image source. If it's presentable on a web page, we should be able to get the image source and paste
Yep.
it in.
Yep, exactly. We're going to look for libguides help. Let me just kind of copy and then just paste that here. Let's
Sorry.
see.
Click on the home tab. Click on the home tab. Sorry.
Okay.
Thought I had that page. There it
Oh,
is.
this one? All
Yes.
right. Let's see if we can view image. Yep, perfect. So you see how up here it has a really long URL that ends with .png. That's what we want. All right. So we go, what I just said, let's cut it. But you can copy or cut either way. And what you want to do is you go to your Twinery screen and you're going to use HTML. So you want to do img for image, src for search. Then you have the equal sign, and then in quotation marks, you put the URL. And if you want to specify like a set width or height, then you can do that. So let's do width equals, I don't know, 500, and height equals, let's say, I don't know, 600. I remember it was a little bit taller than wider. And if you want to add a component for accessibility, just in case the image isn't there, you add alt. And what that's going to do is display something in case that the image is not there, right? So when your code for the interactive fiction loads, it's going to say, hey, it's asking me to put up an image. Let me go find the picture. If it can't find the picture, then it just gives you the text that you specify here. And so for alt, we're going to call this one, what was it, literary?
It's information goddess avatar.
Information goddess, right? So an information goddess avatar. And then we're going to close that bracket. And then let's go ahead and add a bit of information here. She thought, or she invoked her inner self.
Inner superhero.
Oh, I like that. Let's inner superhero. And then I'm going to need to close this one. When we run it again, we sit there, and when we get to there you have your picture. And you can also use this function, and this is what's really cool, with videos. If you go to YouTube, have a video that you want to embed. Let's see, yeah, here, food theory. Subway bread isn't actually bread, it's cake. That's the theory. So you want to click on share, and then you're going to click on the embed tab, and this little bit of HTML code here, you can copy it, and then you paste it on your interactive fiction. And once you play it, you should have, sit there, the video embedded right there. Now, this has a lot of uses. I'm thinking interactive fiction because I am a bit of a writer slash game designer, but there are people who have used this software to do um, manuals, evaluations, tests, and so on. And we're going to look at some of those in a little bit. But first, though, I want to talk a little bit about some of the more complex things that you can do with this software. So let me go ahead and skip the ones that we just looked at. And by the way, I'll just put up this presentation in the chat. Is that fine, or do you want me to email that to you, Danelle, and then you send it out to everyone who was here?
We can do
Or-
both.
All right, perfect. All right, so let's see. These are the images that we've already used. This for the video that we just demonstrated. All right, so here we go. If you want to give your reader a random choice, so let's say that, for example, you want to give the reader the option of flipping a coin. Is it heads or tails? And you want to make it so that whenever the user flips the coin, they get either heads or tails. Then you're going to use the command either, and then use the colon symbol. And then within the quotation marks, you have whatever you want. So it could be 1, 2, 3. It could be heads, tails. It could be anything else that you can think of. If you want to change the font, then you just specify font. And then within the quotation marks, whatever font you want. It could be Arial. It could be Comic Sans, and so on. And the same for color. So you can have text-color. That's going to change the color of the text, as we see up here in the top right. So in this presentation, you're going to see the broad command. You're going to see how that command is implemented, and you are going to see what the output looks like, right? And those of you who might be familiar with computer code, HTML, and all that stuff might be thinking, well, what about more advanced things like tables? You can absolutely use tables in Twinery. So if you want to have a table in which you have two pictures, for example, and do a kind of find the differences type of puzzle, you can do that. If you want to have two videos side by side demonstrating a kind of sequence, you can do that, and so on, right? So the possibilities are pretty much endless. And this is where it gets really interesting when we start using text styles. Because you can have your text blink, you can have your text be kind of shadowy, you can have it upside down. And this is actually something that I do want to show you what it looks like. So let's go ahead and find it over, where did my presentation go? Here. And we are going to use this text should show a, let's say, blinky. Right. And so for that to happen, you need to set text dash style colon quotation mark blink. You close the quotation mark, you close, and then the text that you want to blink or have whatever color and so on, that text should be within the square block brackets. So if we want, in addition to the blink text, let's say, let's use upside down. We'll go over here, and I will be giving you a document with all of these instructions as well. Upside down, and then maybe we add one more. Let's use, I don't know, Rumble. Rumble. This text is just up with a rumble. Now, just explaining the text is kind of boring, so let's see if we can maybe make up a story with these texts. Maybe the student blinked. And then in standard text, what's going on? Going on, he said. Suddenly, world was Then we're going to have just the word upside down, up here, upside down. And then he started trembling. And if we have any medical experts here or from the nursing school, you might start thinking like, well, what's happening? Should we, like call 911 or something like that?
He's trembling because he just got his writing assignment. He walked and he sees all the work he has to do in the library, and he just starts to tremble until the information goddess calms him down by showing him how to do it.
Yeah, I like that. See, so here we have the effects. The student blinked. What's going on? He said with standard text only. The word was upside down, and he was trembling. Right. So all of these effects can kind of give your story a little bit of flavor, a little bit of an aesthetic, which will make it even more engaging. All right. So these are kind of the basics of Twine. There are also functions that you can use, like, for example, variables to keep track of the choices that your reader makes. If, for example, you want to have a story with some kind of a moral or a message at the end, and then you give your reader the option, like, oh, I want to walk up to someone and punch them. And then you give them like a bad point, or I walk up to someone and give them a gift, and then you give them a good point. So you do have the option of doing that. But I think that's a little bit more complex than the time that we have for. So what I'll do is that I'll include those instructions in the file that I will upload on the chat in a little bit. Now, any questions so far?
As someone who does not have a background in coding, or at least I took one class in high school, more years than I care to admit, how hard do you think it would be for somebody like me to get involved or get started in something like this and creating some sort of interactive story?
Oh, to get started is super easy. All you need is the creativity and imagination to think about your story, and then, of course, going back to I don't know why the presentation just keeps shutting down. Going back to this slide, you need to have the kind of design thinking to prevent yourself from, writing your story into something that looks like this. Creating these many entries, 31 entries, might take you, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 hours, depending on whether you've already thought about all of the options, right? But then your reader is only going to read 5 steps. So they have their first step, and then they make a choice, and they make a choice. So we have 3, 4, 5. And that's all that the reader experiences. So to prevent that, what you want to do, and this is really where you're going to spend most of your time, is kind of drafting the structure of your story so that you don't overwhelm yourself. But as far as the technical aspect, it's actually super easy for you to just follow through. If you are really shy about technology, you can just stick to the basics and then just use the double brackets on either end. And that's just automatically going to do that. You can stay away from adding any of the bells and whistles until you're more familiar with how the system works. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
All right, awesome.
Also, the fact that you said you were going to give us a cheat sheet, that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I see in the chat someone wrote choose your own adventure. That's absolutely correct. I'm just not that familiar with how many of you are familiar with like those old choose your own adventure books from like the 70s and 80s. I actually learned about that genre with these old kind of Nintendo books where you would play as Link and they would give you a puzzle. Like if you can trace over this symbol without lifting your pencil, go to page 78. If not, then go to page 57, and then you trace over it. You go to page 78, and you realize that you made an error. And it's like your character's dead now, right? So this would be something along those lines. At least on the literary end of the LL spectrum. On the more ludic end, you can create Dungeons and Dragons here. At least classic Dungeons and Dragons with having the system roll dice for you. With having the system kind of keep track of any equipment that you pick up. But that's something that would probably take like a whole semester to go over, right? Not just a kind of 1 hour talk. Any other questions?
I like that idea. Actually, I do a lot of board gaming, and I have done some ongoing campaigns, and using this to kind of plot out your DM, your dungeon master, game master structure. I like this tool. I have to remember this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. And this is actually one of the things that my kid uses. Or not this one exactly. He uses one that's called Inform 7. That's a little bit more technical. I actually pulled it up. This one does require a little bit more coding and kind of like, structured thinking. But he basically maps out his adventures before going into it using this tool. And then he also uses, this is my thing, it's called Roll20, where he kind of keeps track of his adventures and the players and all that stuff. But absolutely, this is like a great way for you to get started. If you're not someone who's that familiar with technology and coding, and if you are, then you can use it to create like some really cool stuff. Any other questions? All right, so what I want to do now is kind of show you some of the more interesting stuff that I've seen here that has been created using Twinery. Philomela, I don't know if I should say is or was, because even though it's still online, it's closed for new submissions. But let's say it is a platform that hosts works created with Twine and that were previously uploaded through Twitter. And this one is actually not interactive fiction. It's a self-care guide, and apologies for the lewd language there, but it's not me who created it. So this is meant to be an interactive flowchart for people who struggle with self-care, executive dysfunction, and so on and so forth. So I'm ready for the first question. And have you eaten in the last 4 hours? If you've eaten or could use a snack or no, then the system will give you some active feedback. So I could use a snack. When you need a snack, just pop by and get some easy food and so on, right? Okay, I finished my snack. Let me grab my sip of soda. So you have your snack. Have you taken any medication that you need to take? Let's say that, oh no, I haven't taken my medication. The system will tell you, well, go take your medication, right? And so on, right? So this is kind of a self-help system that someone created using Twinery. This one is a protocol manual. This one I was really impressed by. Let's just go ahead and get started here. That does include text. Oh, this one's even more complex than I remember it. It basically guides you through certain protocols that the Indian government, it was developed by the Indian government, expects you to do as a government worker, Indian Health Services. And then this one is, your kind of standard interactive fiction. I showed this one because of the background. I wanted to show you that this is also something that you could do. Just kind of change the color of the background so that your output will not always be just white on black. You can play around with these things, but at this point, for you to change the background and for you to universally change the text, you have to get into what's called CSS. That's a kind of markup language that's a little bit more complex than the Twinery default. And then the last one that they uploaded to the platform before it was closed down is standard interactive fiction, but in French. I remember I was sharing this. I was playing this earlier, so it just took me to the end. I was showing this earlier to a colleague, and he asked me earlier in the year, and he asked me, well, can I use that for my Spanish classes? And absolutely, Spanish, French, Japanese, doesn't matter. If it's a language-based course, you can use this platform, right? And then once you have finished with your work of interactive fiction, what you want to do is create the file. So you're going to click down here, you're going to click publish to file, and that should let you just save the file to your computer. And once you have your file, you are going to go to itch.io. Let me go ahead and link that website on the chat. And that's a website where game developers upload their stuff. It's mostly for indie games, but occasionally you do have some of the bigger names, Gone Home and so on, kind of pop up on this platform. And once you sign up for an account, you just need to create a project. You fill in the information. So what's the title, the description, and so on. And then you upload the files and you're good to go. All right. You click on Save and View Page, and it'll show up on your account. All right. So that's all I got for interactive fiction. We would, at this point, normally have some time for me to kind of go over your work, but I don't know how many of you have been following along. But if any of you have something that you want to share, or if you've been playing around with Twinery and you have any questions, I'm more than happy to field them now.
I'll start off by saying I actually am going to go back and look at that Philomela example you gave, because I started laughing. I'm glad I had my mic muted, because I started laughing really loudly when it was the self-care module, because I'm so ADHD that I actually, when I get excited about something or I start to follow a bunch of different thoughts at once, I'll forget to eat. I'll go 6, 7, 8 hours, and I'm so in my head and excited about a concept or a thing or whatever I'm working on that I don't even notice that I'm hungry. And then I'll suddenly be really cranky and I'll crash. And I have a couple of really good friends that I'll send them some text message where I'm just like expressing anger or frustration or despair. And they've gotten to where their first question to me is always, "Have you eaten?" That is just the first. So I started laughing immediately, because I thought, this would actually be a really great tool for someone to kind of send to type out in your good, sane, calm, lucid moments, to type out a series of questions to remind yourself, hey, here's what's going on. And then from there, since we're doing a fiction class, it reminded me of the movie Memento, where the main character has this retrograde amnesia where he can't form new memories. So he tattoos all over his body messages to himself to remind himself of what's happening. And the entire movie, it's just really fascinating, is told in reverse. So the action, you start off at the end and then kind of reconstruct the story retrospectively. And I thought this format would be a great way to tell a story like that. You could write a story forward and then basically just reverse all of the sequencing and have a reconstructed, deconstructed, reconstructed story like that. I thought that was a really interesting combination of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great example of design thinking right there. This tool, a lot of people use it to just do, like someone said in the chat, was that you? Yeah, like you mentioned in the chat, to do choose your own adventure, but you don't strictly have to stick to a kind of, linear structure. You can start in medias res, have, flashbacks and foreshadowing. And what's interesting is that I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of side shadowing. It's something that some writers use to hint at something that might have happened in the story, but didn't actually happen. Not necessarily in the context of dreams or whatever, but in the context of a character thinking about possibilities. And so with this tool, that's something that you can actually do very easily. You can, for example, add an option that's like, wonder or daydream or imagine or whatever. And then you have all of this separate story branch that tells you what could have happened if the character had, done an action, and then just kind of cycle back to the moment where the action has to be made. And then maybe you do decide to take the action that you hinted at, but then something goes wrong, right? And it's a completely different outcome. So that kind of really interesting narrative structure, it's something that can actually come to life using this platform. So thanks for that great comment, Andrew. Frank? Not sure which one was it that commented that.
Either one. It's Andrew. Frank is my first name, but Andrew's fine.
Okay, cool. So there you go. Thanks. Any other questions or anything like that?
So Johansson, you mentioned that you've seen people use this technology for training manuals. Other than obviously English classes, what other ways could we use this in other disciplines?
The one that I remember seeing, and I was actually trying to find it but couldn't, this was, I want to say 2, maybe 3 years ago. They had a manual with a bunch of procedures for nurses. Specifically, it was about how to treat a patient when they're trying to, when the patients are getting a little bit hostile. And it was kind of, a consideration, is your patient becoming hostile? Yes, no. If you click yes, what do you mean by hostile? And then it give you options like, their voice is a little bit loud. Are they looking at you like sideways, or are they actually trying to get physical? And if you're trying to get physical, then what action should you take? Should you try to wrestle down the patient? Should you run out and get security? And so on. So it was kind of like a training exercise that took you through a set of hypotheticals, and what would happen if you were in that kind of situation. That's the one that I saw, but I can also imagine this working for, lab safety, for example. You would create a situation where a student is in a lab and then they mix chemicals and suddenly, poof, there's a fire somehow. What should the student do? And then the designer of the interactive fiction would kind of map out the more common outcomes of taking those actions, right? So that's the kind of training that would take place with this. And I've also seen people use this as tests. My guess would be kind of informal tests. I'm not sure how they did the grading. I reached out to them, but they never got back to me. But I have seen people post tests here where it's like question A, B, C, D. It's just an interactive fiction format.
So if you were to use something like this for testing's sake, can you actually see, once someone goes through your story, do you see like a spreadsheet of what their answers were and where they clicked? Is there some kind of a chart to the analytics, I guess you're saying, afterwards?
There's not, and that's why I said I'm not sure how they did the assessment. My best guess is that they had some kind of a variable, like I mentioned that earlier. Let me see if I can pull up the variables here. So this would be the function for variables, and you can see why I didn't want to go into that length. But basically, they probably had variable correct answers. And then whenever the student clicked on a correct answer, then that would increase by 1. So correct answer equals correct answer plus 1. And then at the end, they would have a screen where it would say you get this many correct answers, and then just the variable number would be projected. And then my guess is that they would have to screenshot that, send it to the instructor. So even though it creates for some really interesting and engaging, I'm going to use practice exams rather than exams. It doesn't really work for traditional assessment as we know it. It would probably be more for self-assessment and self-reflection.
Well, the way you were describing it for nursing is almost, it's very similar to the simulation. So in the sim lab where we actually have, fake patients and they're walking through it, this could be something they do before they even get to that level. Like this would be the first level of simulation where you're just kind of talking through it. Then we go to the sim lab where they actually practice with the mannequins. I think this could be scaffolding some of their skills, starting off with that. Those are some great ideas.
Yep, absolutely. All right. So, any other questions or comments? All right. Perfect.
Building off of what Danelle just said, actually, I was thinking of during COVID, before Chelsea, one of the librarians I work with, and I had done a really good job of making inroads with our faculty across lots of disciplines to come use the 3D printing lab and incorporate that some kind of printed object or just design project into a project in a class or an assignment. And of course, now we can't have the students all in there in a clump, touching all the surfaces and playing with everything. But one of the things we do when we're giving them their orientation to beginning 3D design is to, one of the big concepts is that the orientation of the physical orientation, the spatial orientation of the object that you print makes a tremendous difference in the quality of the object that you get when you're done and whether or not that object will fail or succeed. So there's something like a pyramid. A pyramid is really easy to print because a pyramid is basically just a series of squares, each one smaller than the previous one, stacked on top of each other. So since it's very stackable, it's very easy for a standard 3D printer to print. But if you turn it upside down and print it on the point of the pyramid, you need all the support material. You got to scrape all that off, break all that off. You have the possibility of it coming free of the build plate and tilting. So I was thinking of this as a way of demonstrating that, where it could be we have pre-printed objects in different orientations and taken live video of the objects at the point of failure, then put them in this kind of structure, and the students can check can go through the process and say, okay, here's your design. Now, which orientation do you want to print this at? Do you want to print it on this side or this side or this side? They choose one, and then we kind of get to show them a video of here's what actually happened when you you made that choice. And that'd be a really good training tool when we can't be hands-on during COVID.
Absolutely. I can see you integrating there both video and images. Would you use YouTube or another platform to upload your videos?
We'd probably use YouTube for now.
Yeah, it would work perfectly. So that's a really good idea. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that I can upload the documents to the chat. Did I stop sharing? I think so. And let's see. Yes. The upload from my computer.
Everybody show your background.
Pardon?
Everyone should show their background like you were doing.
Yeah, that'd be cool. All right, let's see. So we have Twinery Basics Guide. And it's there. Did you get the? Oh, there it is. And now for the presentation itself. That one might take a little bit longer to send because it's a little bit larger. All right, so any other questions? All right, in that case, it has been a pleasure speaking to you all. Have a good one, and I will see you around tomorrow.
All right, thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks Johansson for this really interesting presentation and all those tools. We hope to see everyone tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central for the intellectual property session.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.